overlapping on the hour. So this
Okay.
the brave new world. Now we're busy in a different way.
Yeah, it's terrible.
Yeah. Because that's not coffee that you're drinking either, I know.
Oh, it's tea right now.
Yeah. If you blow on scotch with ice cubes in a coffee glass, it actually creates a mist as well, so it looks like it's steaming coffee.
You know, thermal mugs will keep it just as cold. If you put it in the freezer and then pour it into a thermal mug, it'll stay cold. You don't need ice at all.
People truly do think that I'm drinking coffee, but it's okay. And then this is the water. So I just back and forth, back and forth.
Straight absinthe. That's why you got the glass of water.
Yeah. When the flame in the sugar cube melts, it's a little bit of a telltale sign, though. So you got to be careful with that.
There's probably no way around. It's the only light I got in my room, unfortunately. So it's a halo.
Paul Curl.
It is. I get a white scene 10 hour, and it just plays put the contrast all the way up, and that gives me that, because without it, I'm that.
Oh, okay.
And I got another light there. So this is me just with my room lights. There we go.
Yeah, there.
You got it. Okay, I'm muting myself.
Jay, how you doing?
Good, yourself?
Doing well.
I got to put you guys on mute here because I have a screaming child in the background.
This all set up ish.
Mostly tribe. Jax, how's your week going? I know we'll talk here in a bit, but
Hectic. I've been up since probably 2:30 this morning.
Okay.
Is what it is, though.
Yep.
Clients are still working for the most part, and trying to figure out plans for some of our bigger jobs still. Getting a lot of call for audits at this point. If people don't know what to do about them. So
hello, Shannon.
Hello. Sorry, had to unmute.
we need.
And we will get started. Welcome all. Thank you for joining us. We're here in the ongoing series from Cyndicate organization to share business advice, suggestions, teaching, and learning to business owners. Now, for the bulk of the people on this call today, of course, you're part of that Cyndicate tribe. But in the future, we're looking to bring in even more people and being able to share even more. Ben, welcome to the party. On our Cyndicate call today, we've got Jackson Fisk from Goal Zero, who is one of the foremost experts in safety in Alberta and in our region. And he has had tens of thousands of hours of practice time. He's worked with hundreds of companies, and now he's going to be sharing fundamentals, which means that everything that almost every company needs to do. There have been a number of changes to safety and safety legislation over the last couple of years. One of the biggest changes and amendments to legislation and the way safety works, just very recently within the last year to 18 months, meant that most businesses, particularly of employees and work sites, have to have some form of safety controls, safety roles, safety rules, standard operating procedures, and safety systems in place. Otherwise, your business and your employees can be put at jeopardy. Jackson's role and his job with Goal Zero is to help small, medium, and large enterprises realize what these shortcomings and what these disadvantages that they have, what they can do in an immediate term or from an immediate future standpoint to be able to help those businesses, and then ultimately be able to put themselves on the right track when it comes to their safety processes and their policies as well. So as an introduction to safety today, there are a number of people, again, joining us that have got some background that touches on this or where their industry sits very closely to it. But this will, one would hope, help to illuminate, allow you to take back to your own clients, perhaps to have potentially useful insight of your own business, and to give you an opportunity to share to other people, because what you don't know in the case when it comes to safety can absolutely hurt you. Jackson's going to take us through the model for the way safety is set up overall. And then, as the title suggests for this segment, 4 safety tools every business needs in today's marketplace, we're going to dive down and talk more specifically and more exactly about the 4 fundamentals that we're going to need to set up basic structural safety systems for our businesses and how we can expand from there. Jackson, welcome. Everybody that's joined us, welcome to it. And Jackson, I will turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you, Mitch, and thank you, Cyndicate family, for showing up and supporting. That's awesome. Well, Mitch pretty much just said my whole presentation in like 3 minutes, so I don't know what else to talk about after this, but we'll figure it out. So I'm just going to share my screen. Hang on here. Screen share. Can everyone see my screen and see the Prezi?
There's no presentation. Oh, now there is. Yep.
Perfect. Okay, cool. Working through technology, not like I use it every day of my life. Okay, so fundamentals of safety. Regardless of the company, what your operations are, what your capacity is, if you are in business in one form or another, health and safety needs to be part of your operations. Now, a lot of it we deal with an HR perspective in a lot of different industries, right? Our white collar, we usually have operation manuals, HR manuals, but they're still going to incorporate health and safety into those policies. Okay, so anything from the landowner to prime contractor to the contractors, subcontractors, whatever facet your business operates in, if you contract to other people, you are responsible for health and safety. Now, that prime contractor is also responsible to make sure that you follow health and safety legislation. And these are kind of the points that a lot of businesses miss, right? Or they don't enforce. So I give you an example. I had a client come up to me and go, "Hey, Jackson, I don't really have employees." I go, "Okay, well, what do you do?" "I only use contractors." Go, "Okay, so what processes and policies do you have in place to ensure that they're following legislation?" "Well, I make sure that they have WCB and I make sure they have insurance." "Okay, that's cool. That's a good start. How do we know that they're actually following legislation and following everything that's outlined that they're supposed to follow?" And they go, "I don't know." Cool. Well, if they don't follow it, you're still responsible. Okay. So you have to have processes in place to make sure that your contractors or whoever you're working for, those checks and balances are in place. Because if not, it falls on you. Kind of makes sense? I can't see anyone's face, so it's going to give me a thumbs up or yell out if this is kind of making sense as I go through it. Thanks, Mitch. Okay. So a little bit background to me. Been working in health and safety now for, I'm aging myself, over a decade or so. And it touched every aspect of my careers, from the military to medic, firefighter, trades, and every aspect of management. Okay. And it wasn't until I started to educate myself in it specifically that I understand on how much and how important it is to a company's operation. So when we talk about health and safety, there's a few different things we can talk about. And I like to have it as a sliding scale of compliance and culture. Okay. And when we talk about safety, compliance to culture, we either have, okay, we have some check boxes that we got to reach. I do everything that I'm supposed to the lowest common denominator to make sure that my business functions. And I'm going to tell you that most companies that I see and I go talk to, 80% of them don't even hit compliance anymore. Okay. So it's pretty scary. Most people only do things that they're either taught, they know, or they've screwed up at and they've had to fix, right? Because that's how they're educated in knowing that they have to do them. So when we talk about a safety culture, we have signs of a negative safety culture. And I don't know if you've ever worked for these businesses or if you look at the corporations that you work in now or your businesses, but a negative safety culture, right? Profits before safety. It's led by fear. It's ineffective leadership, and there's a lot of miscommunications. Now, that kind of sums up most of my construction when I was going through before I got into management, right? We don't have the resources we need. We don't have the tools. We don't have the training. We don't have anything, but we're told to go do a job and get it done. And for the most part, we just kind of go along with it because we need to work, right? It goes into a video. You guys see enough of my videos. We don't need to talk about that. You can see them on a later date through social media. And then I've worked for some good companies that we build a strong culture, right? We build trust, we provide training, we provide communication channels, and we lead by example. And I take this back down to even when I was an apprentice. And the first journeyman who actually taught me how to do my job properly pretty much changed the trajectory of my whole career and my life. Because working from a negative safety culture and being used to that, you just went, well, it is what it is. And then I had one person take me aside and go, what do you think we should do? And I went, well, I don't know. You tell me. They went, no, use your brain. Let's step this out. Let's look at the job we're going to do, because one day it's going to be up to you. And I was talking to him and I went, well, I don't get paid to do that. I get paid from here down. And he goes, cool. Then you're going to be like everyone else in this industry. And if you want to be like everyone else, I don't want to work with you. And if you want to be good at what we're doing, then you're going to start using your brain and you're going to think proactively, and we're going to do this and work together. And it built me into, who I am today, because he led by example, he communicated, and he trained me, right? So that's from a trade perspective. But if we do this in every aspect of our business, it doesn't matter what you're doing. If you can provide the training, you trust your employees, we can build a good safety culture, okay? Or business culture or operational culture. And that's kind of the goal that we want every business to go to. And if you don't have a strong culture, well then, hopefully we're hitting compliance. And if we're not hitting compliance, then you're just playing a lottery and we're hoping nothing happens. So yeah, that's not a tip on a tool, but it's an important part of when we look at when we assess safety in a business. First thing I look at is their culture, because I'm going to see if what I have to fix, if it's an operational issue, if it's a policy issue, if it's cultural issue. A lot of times it comes to culture, right? Because if we don't have those leaders that are willing to accept health and safety and provide a safe working place for all of its operations, all of its employees, of every facets of its business, then, that's where I need to fix it first. And that's where we call in other professionals to help as well. So the first tool on every foundation of a health and safety system is management commitment. If we don't have management commitment and a clear management commitment policy that's written, documented from a company's top level of the company, we don't really have a standing point. Okay. This dictates pretty much everything that we're going to do within our health and safety program. Your management commitment, you have to believe that all incidents of occupational illnesses, injuries, and property environment damage are preventable through proactive measures and communication. If we don't believe that actually everything is preventable, then it's not preventable, right? If we allow things and say, oh, stuff just happens, well, then stuff's just going to happen. And we can't allow that. We have to have a statement of authority. So a health and safety program will outline the organization system to be utilized by a company to ensure work is completed to meet or exceed necessary requirements of the current code, standards, and regulations. This will include assigned authority and responsibilities to all levels. So when it comes to safety and operations of a company, I don't know if you've heard this at all, but if it's not written down, you can't prove it. So whether it's an investigation from the government, regulatory body, or anything, if you don't have something written down, you can't prove that you did it. So this statement of authority is going to pretty much lay out in a blunt kind of process of who's responsible for what when it comes to a health and safety system. So senior managers are responsible for X, Y, Z. Okay, they're going to lead by example. They're going to do X amount of meetings a year. They're going to do X amount of inspections a year. And they're going to promote health and safety and supply all of the tools and resources needed to complete the job safe. Then it'll go down to frontline supervisors or workers, or if you have a dedicated HR department or a safety department. But it's going to lay out who has authority over what and who can report to who. Come on, thing. Employee obligations, rights, and responsibilities. So it does not matter what industry you are in. It does not matter if you sit at a desk. It does not matter if you are working by yourself as a contractor or you oversee hundreds of people. You have rights and responsibilities or obligations under legislation. You have a right to know. So the right to know means that you have a right to know that of every hazard that could come in contact and hurt you at work. And you have a right to know how it's going to affect you in your day-to-day operations. You have a right to participate. That right to participate means pretty much you have a say, okay, within the company's health and safety management system. So we do this by proper two-way communication, proper meetings, and actually being involved in the health and safety process. And we'll touch on that a little more. But if it affects your health and safety, you have a right to say and participate in it. And then you have an obligation to refuse. So your obligation to refuse is if something is not safe. So if you are not trained properly, you are not competent, or something's not right, there's no controls in place to protect you from something or you getting hurt, it is your obligation to refuse that work. Okay? Not enough people do this at all. A case study example, I guess, would be I had a client, and it's been 1.5 years now, and it was a drilling company, and they were working in Kitwanga, BC, and they were doing piling. So I don't know if any of you have seen piling rigs. The rigs go on the back of a truck, the derrick lifts up, they drive it in position, and they drill piling holes. And they decided to set this rig up 5 feet away from a 25,000 kilovolt electrical utility line. The swamper grabbed the winch cable decided to walk over to hook up its auger. The truck was parked under the utility line. So as soon as he started walking towards his auger, the electricity arced over, went down the winch line, entered his middle finger, and blew off 3 of his right toes. The only thing that saved his life was the driller in the cab pivoted the turntable and broke the connection. So I got a call. I had to fly up to Kitwanga, BC, and do an investigation with WorkSafe BC. And this took about a month. And doing our investigation, we found numerous holes. And it comes back again to a culture issue. That we had everything written, documented, perfect, beautiful, tools in place for them to use, and they've signed off and trained, and they just decided not to follow or read any of them. In the worker's statement, he said, "I knew this wasn't right, but I did it anyway." And he almost lost his life. He walks with a limp now, and he's pretty gun shy on doing anything, and rightfully so. The real sad part on this, though, is that worker decided that he wanted to sue everyone involved. And I said I will provide him with all the information, all the inspections, all the investigation findings. But unfortunately, you have an obligation to refuse unsafe work. And he wrote blatantly in the statement that he did it anyway. So he doesn't really have anyone to blame but himself. Yes, there's a whole bunch of holes that happened, and there was a whole bunch of issues that could have been fixed before this happened. But ultimately, safety is still up to that worker, and he should have refused. So this is actually written into every management and commitment policy or section of the manual, or should be. And we train on it over and over again. Policies. I have some nice definition of what a policy means. The simple version is, this is how we do business. So in your management commitment, you're going to outline, start getting into your policy documents for your company. Again, if it's not written down, you cannot prove how you do anything. Whether it's IT, right? So I'm sure if JD would talk about, he has policies and procedures that he gives companies or helps companies with on saying, this is how, we set up your security, or this is how you interact with certain equipment. If they don't have these guidelines, we can't hold anyone accountable. We can't, correct any breakdowns, and we can't, make sure that it's going in the right direction. So a well-defined and clearly demonstrated management commitment policy is the first thing you'll ever see in a health and safety system, or it should be. The next thing, and this is another overlooked yet legislatively required aspect of a health and safety program, is hazard assessments. So again, whatever your industry is, it does not matter. You are legislatively required to assess and control any hazard within your workplace. So a lot of people will come to me and they'll go, "Well, Jackson, we run an accounting firm. What hazards do we have?" I go, "Great question." Ergonomic hazards, strains, harassment and violence. There's still things that need to be done. And to give an example, the government of Alberta has a 14-page hazard assessment for filing documents. So not that that's fun to write, read, or review, but it exists. So to get companies to do something, we have to assess hazards. And we do that by pretty much a few things. We have to identify hazards, and we break them down by either work task or position. Okay? So position, we kind of do a general overview, and that's a good start. And then we can dig down into work tasks. So for some of my clients, it can be very simple. We have an administrative task, we have a supervisor task, and we have a field task, or group. And then we do a hazard assessment about it. And, again, to get to that compliance level, it works. It works very well. And then when we go to build culture, then we start breaking that down and hammering it down a little deeper. So we could go into, well, my office clerk has to sit at the desk. They have to file paperwork. They do run errands. They do some cleaning activities. They do X, Y, and Z. And we will hammer that out and we'll go through those. So a majority of occupational incidents and illnesses are preventable. And this event is to introduce the process of hazard assessment or hazard identification assessment. This process is a fundamental part of your health and safety program. And we need to do it to monitor hazards and activities in the workplace. So the biggest thing is, if you were to have an incident or a claim, whether it be ergonomic stress, a person got, say, into a car accident to and from work or during work activities, or, we have hard trades and, that worker got hurt. The first thing we do is we pull this hazard assessment document. It's the first thing that I usually look at in an investigation, or I ask for it. I ask for this, and then I asked for permits, policies, procedures, training, all that. But if they don't have this document, I know that they didn't actually assess their workplace and they don't care about their workers at all, because this tool should be built before your workers go to work. This is usually done by a team. So depending on the size of your operation, it can be done by an owner. It can be done by the person completing the task. It can be done by a joint health and safety committee, or it can be done by a full department. But the more people that you have involved in this process, the more accurate it's going to be. So when I go and I build hazard assessments for companies, I ballpark them, because I don't do all the work that they do, right? I can't go to Matt and go, hey, Matt, I know everything about barter. Let me write a hazard assessment for this. I have no clue. I can assume and I can make assumptions, and I can lay out a framework for them and go, okay, this is what I think. Now let's sit down. You actually do this. You know what your workers are doing. So let's hammer through this and build down and make sure it's accurate to actually what you do. Because if these tools aren't built accurately for the work being done, people aren't going to follow them anyway. Okay? So a formal hazard assessment is a step-by-step process. This is an example of what a formal hazard assessment template would look like. This template is just pulled from the government. Mine are a little different of how I break them down. But we do the position and type of work. The assessment is performed by, it's usually who built it, right? Or the team who built it. We hammer out a list of tasks. So the more detailed we can get into this task, the more detailed we can get into a hazard assessment. Let's see if I can do this a little better so you guys can. Is that a little better? I have 0 feedback, so we're going to say it's good. So tasks, we list all tasks and activities for the job and position. And again, the more that we can actually hammer this down, the better. Now, I've had guys, they try to go, or people, they go, well, what do you want me to tell me how to tie my boots? If you need to, right? I don't know of your work culture and your competency level, but sometimes we need to be that specific, right? If it's specialized PPE or a specialized task, yeah, I would actually hammer down onto how to don and doff PPE properly, right? Because it depends on what we're going. Say we're going into a hazardous chemical atmosphere, and we need specialized PPE. I'm going to tell these people what type of gloves to select, or I'm going to advise them what to select. I'm going to advise them how they're going to put these on properly. I'm going to advise them how they take them off properly, and what happens in an emergency if something, were to go wrong. When it comes to an administrative task, well, it might be, okay, we're going to assess our work area. We're going to set up our workstation. We're going to do an ergonomic assessment, right? And then we're going to break down our task further from there. For each task, we list out all existing and potential health and safety hazards. So this could be, again, a sprain or strain injury. We don't say sprain or strain though. We're going to say strain due to overextension of one's body or improper ergonomic position. It could be a physical hazard. So, if we're working in a yard, it could be, we have vehicle traffic, we have other workers in the area, we have big equipment, we have, we're working with heavy tools. We will put all of these in there. Then we get to risk rank it. So severity, likelihood, and risk. Definitions are always built into a risk matrix. So for here, severity, how serious could the consequence be? 3, it could kill you or cause a permanent disability. 2, it could send you to the hospital. 1, it can make you uncomfortable. So obviously, the higher the severity, the more we actually want to put in controls and look at. The likelihood, how likely is this going to happen? Very likely, it might happen, it is unlikely. And then the risk, calculated severity times likelihood equals risk. Now this is their example. This is what the government actually puts out as an example of a formal hazard assessment. When we look at different risk matrices, there is different calculations on how we get to severity. There's not one set way, but there has to be a clear definition of what severity and frequency is. Some people put a nominal fee. So depending on the operation, we can go, okay, so let's say data management. Okay, well, if something were to go wrong from maybe not even like a person worker standpoint, but loss of data. Okay, so if someone did something wrong, and so the worker might be okay, but say we lost 500,000 to $1 million in revenue, or however we calculate that, that could be a high risk, right? So we can put a nominal fee to it. So after we've risk ranked everything, we've laid everything out, we have to put controls in place. So we can't just say we're going to be careful. Trust me, people try all the time. Or if we have slip trip hazards, I get a lot of people to go, look at feet or watch footing. Well, that's not really control. That's not anything we can put in there. So we have to list out the controls that we're going to have, and this is built back into our health and safety management system, is we can either eliminate it, so it's not a hazard at all, or we can put an engineering control in place. So an engineering control is pretty much a physical barricade or barrier that's going to stop you from getting to a hazard, or it's an engineered, let's think an HVAC system to move air, right? Something that's its strict purpose is to remove a hazard from an area. Or we have an administrative control. So an administrative control is anything that we write down, whether it's a standard operating procedure, a code of practice, safe work practice, or this hazard assessment in general, telling us how we're going to step it out and how we're going to control things, is considered an administrative control. Right now with COVID-19, we have a lot of posters going out. We have a lot of stickers. We have a lot of painted lines. These are both engineering and administrative controls. So something we can see, read, touch, that's going to give us a directive on how to do something safely so we don't get hurt. And then personal protective equipment. So if we're doing any task that actually requires PPE, personal protective equipment is our last line of defense always. In a perfect world, it would go on as clean and as beautiful and as nice as it went on every day. Okay, so a lot of times when we do an investigation, I hear a lot of, oh, thankfully I was wearing my hard hat, or thankfully I was wearing my safety glasses, or thankfully I was wearing my gloves. Yeah, that's great. Like, I'm super happy they worked for you. But that's not going to be our root cause of what happened, right? They're not supposed to work. We lost a step somewhere along the line where our policy needs to be relooked at, the work procedure needs to be relooked at, our controls need to be relooked at, because your PPE shouldn't have actually saved you, right? Our practices and behaviors and everything else should have saved us. So that is a formal hazard assessment, or a quick overview. And these take practice. These need to be reviewed on an ongoing basis. Legislatively and audit, core standard audit guidelines is at least once a year. Once a year, when something changes, a new hazard or process is introduced, or on an ongoing regular basis is how the government outlines this. And so with most of our clients, we do quarterly. Okay. So seasons change, and that usually means hazards change. So depending on the operations, again, if I'm working with an accounting firm, okay, maybe once every 6 months is fine, right? But we need to keep that we need to keep it fresh in their mind. And we want people actually engaged in this process. For our hard trades, we do it every quarter or every new job, right? So locations are different, sites are different, processes are kind of the same, but there's still unique hazards that are associated with all those types of work. And so every job, we usually get them to redo these. So hazard assessment in some form or another is required by every company who falls under legislation, which is everybody. So when you look at your company, look at what you have there. And if you need to implement something, we have tools and resources for you to look at it. Don't need to look at the video of me. I'm already talking. The other version is a site-specific hazard assessment. So this might not directly apply to everyone's operations, okay? And there's different ways to roll these out. This is going to apply really specifically to all of our trade groups, because this becomes common practice. So we've done that formal hazard assessment where we've laid out, okay, this is everything that should happen. And then we get to a job site and we go, okay, this is completely different. So they have to do a site-specific hazard assessment. These are sometimes called start cards, pre-jobs, field level hazard assessments. I've heard heart cards by certain industries. So every crew in a trade group will do these before they start every job. And then supervisors will usually come and sign off on them to make sure that the processes, the hazards are eliminated and everything's controlled so they can do their work safely. This is another thing when we go to an investigation, one of the first things I pull, because this should be on a work crew every job that they do. Now, being in the industry that I am, I've always pulled these apart. And every company and client that you work for will pull them apart. Because let's be serious, we're human. So when we go to assess a job, people they only see what they see, and it depends on actually how involved they are. So again, this comes to a cultural thing. And I can relate this back to another fun story of the same journeyman who kind of corrected me on my way. When these first came out, I was still in the trade where they weren't a thing. When I started, this wasn't an actual document. And when they came out, we all went, these are stupid. Why do I have to do this? This is dumb. And I remember I spent 2 hours one day in the office trying to line up the printer rollers so I could fill out the perfect one and then print 30 copies for the month so I didn't have to do them every day. And when he found me, he went, what are you doing? You should be fired. I went, what? I'm making our life easier. He's like, how much time did you spend trying to correct this document or make this perfect? I said, I don't know, a couple hours. He said, cool. How long does it actually take us to write this in the field? Like, 10 minutes? He's like, yeah. So you could have done one every day and not wasted my time and when I needed you to do some help. And it stuck with me pretty much for everything we do in health and safety. He goes, if you treat this like a piece of paper, it's a piece of paper and it is not going to do you any good. But if you use this tool that they have provided us with to actually walk and talk about our job, and it can build a discussion with everyone that we're working with, that we can say, hey, we're going to do this, this, and this, and this. Watch out for these things. Watch out for this. Are we all on the same page? Do we agree? He's like, we just actually got to plan our job, talk it out, and make sure one another's safe when we get to go home. And he's like, instead of you dicking around and trying to do this for 2 hours, he's like, treat this like the tool it's supposed to be used for, and we can go home safely, or not treat it like a piece of paper and you don't care about yourself. And I took that to every apprentice I ever trained. I gave them the same speech, and I still give them this. I give clients the same speech every time I go talk to them now. This tool and this hazard assessment process, from the formal to the site specific, is so important to our company operations to make sure that we're efficient and that our workers go home safe. That it's the one thing you need to do all the time through your safety program that is actually tangible and you can see results from. Okay. Next, how am I doing for time? Okay. So management commitment, hazard assessment. If we can get people to start doing this, you are above 80% of your peers. Okay, depending on what your industry is, because people don't do them. Next, in our environment, I'm going to skip through these really quick. Control measures, we talked about eliminating risk. Inspection programs, preventative maintenance, okay? If we have facilities, if we have equipment, we have to do scheduled inspections to make sure we're actually doing what we say we're going to do, and then we can create corrective actions from them. The big one right now, especially amid COVID-19, this can tie nicely into it, is emergency response planning. So no matter what your operations are, you have to have an emergency response plan by legislation. It has to be tested at least once a year, okay? Now, when we talk about emergency response planning, what is the first thing that everyone comes to mind? You're right, fire drills. Thanks. Okay, so it's fire code, okay? Your fire suppression system, your fire extinguishers, they have to be certified annually, tested annually, whatever your building is. And, you want to know what your workers, they can get out of your building, get out of your office, whatever you're doing, that you have an emergency response plan to deal with fire. That's the go-to. Next one's first aid. So, if someone was working, whether you're at home or you have a home office or you have, 500 workers, if someone gets hurt at work, what do? Okay. This can be everything from a heart attack, a stroke, or physical labor. Okay. Strains and strains. Someone falls down the stairs. We have to think of all of these things. I was up north on a job once, and one of my supervisors came in and started sweating. And I was like, what's wrong? He was like dripping down his face. And he goes, I don't know. And I go, you sit down, you're having a heart attack. And he goes, no, I'm not. And then he dropped, right? And this wasn't something that we ever thought of. We think of someone physically getting hurt on our work sites. This gentleman had a massive heart attack. And luckily, I was trained in everything that I had been trained in, and we got response, and he was okay. But when we look at our operations of whether it's a home office, do you have something in place to make sure that, you have a first aid kit? Do you know how to be trained in that first aid kit? Do you know what to do? Yes, in the city, we say call 911. Sure, that's great. What do we do until 911 gets there? This all has to be outlined in a proper emergency response plan. Other things we don't think of is what's our province? Okay, well, it was +9 like 5 days ago. It was -22 this morning. So extreme volatile weather, have we had tornadoes that ripped apart our city? Doesn't matter if they don't happen all the time, but Black Friday, were people planned for that? Storms, stuff like all the things that could affect your building or your operations. If they can, we have to have a plan in place for that. COVID-19. Do we have something incorporated into our emergency response planning for dealing with a sick worker coming to work? How do we handle that? Okay. The government has guidelines that are laid out that pretty much are spot on. Do this, then this, then this, right? They've laid the framework for us. Do we know about them, and are they implemented into our own processes and procedures right now? Next, when it comes to emergency response planning, that is just recently under OH&S, is harassment and violence in the workplace. So that falls under OH&S now, and in doing so, it has to be incorporated into a prevention plan. You have to train workers on prevention, and you have to train them what to do. So one of the sorry, just caught me off guard there. So we have to incorporate all these aspects into an emergency response plan for every one of our operations. Then we have to train people, and then we have to test them on it. So we have to know that they actually know what to do in case of emergency. If we just write it down, it's no good to us, right? We have to make sure that it's effective for our operations. Then we'll blow through competency assessments. One of my favorite, I'm matured now. I have more boardroom etiquette. But one of my favorite things was to call people not competent in their work if something were to happen, right? Competent means adequately trained or qualified to work with minimal or with enough experience to work with minimal or no supervision. We actually have to have a documented process on how we prove competency. Under legislation right now, you think it would have had to be all the time, but it's written that supervisors have to be deemed competent, right? They don't just get to be the oldest person and been there the longest. They're supposed to be trained with enough experience to work with minimal or no supervision. And they better be trained on all your processes, all your policies, and know what their responsibilities are under legislation. And then we have to administer all this. Again, so we talk about all these things. If it's not written down, you can't prove due diligence under legislation. It's impossible. They're not going to take your word for it. So in the event of a major investigation, if something were to happen, from the date of incident, the government has 2 years to file charges. Okay? So in 2 years, when you go to court, you're probably not going to remember what happened on that date. So when we build a health and safety management system, everything is documented, everything is tracked to be effective for you to prove due diligence within your company. All right. From the changes last year, this is the other key tool that you need to know about. So throughout the Occupational Health and Safety Act and Code, any company, it does not matter your industry. If you have 5 to 19 workers, you have to have a health and safety rep by legislation. Okay? If you have 20 plus employees, you have to form a joint health and safety committee and have a full functioning health and safety management system. So at a minimum, you will have a health and safety policy. You will identify potential hazards. You will have an emergency response plan. You will have worker responsibilities, schedule and procedures for inspections, Procedures to be followed to protect the health and safety of every work site or office or space. Worker or supervisor orientation and training, procedures for investigation, procedures for worker participation in health and safety. And then what other elements that you might need by legislation. So depending on your work scope, you might need code of practice for confined space, hot work, working at heights, and things like that. So this is new, but it's not for the rest of the country. Last year, they kind of just brought us on par with what every other province is supposed to do. Now, unfortunately, that doesn't mean that they do them, but now you can legally be held liable, okay? So if you have questions or you need to know how to do this, send me a message at the end of this, all right? We use fear really easy in health and safety to say, if you don't do this, bad things will happen. But we can really set you up easily to make sure that you're compliant, right? And it's supposed to be an ever-evolving thing. So your health and safety rep should be trained to understand all of this. Your joint health and safety committee should work as a team to resolve these problems. Again, this brings back from a compliance to culture aspect, okay? And the fun part. So what can go wrong? Rule by fear. No, rule by education and everything will go right. But violation tickets. So in 2014, the government passed $100 to $500 tickets for things like PPE, housekeeping, emergency response planning. There's like 67 of them. If you guys follow my social media, you'll see them popping up every week, right? These tickets can either go to a worker directly or the employer or both, usually both, right? So if one's not compliant, if the worker's not compliant and they can get a ticket for it, you best know that the company's getting to. These get attached to your license, like a speeding ticket, okay? So when you go renew your registration, that's where they're going to ding you. The $100 to $500 violation tickets are pretty much like an invitation for them to look at everything else that you're not doing, okay? So to put in an example, roofers in 2016 got $600,000 worth of fines. Why? Because you can drive down the road, look up and go, yeah, that guy's not tied off. Okay, let's go see what else they're doing wrong. And usually it was everything, okay? Because they just refuse to implement anything. Administrative penalties. So after you get your nice $100 to $500 ticket, they're going to go into and look at an administrative penalty. So again, if it's not written down, it means you don't have it, okay? So administrative penalties can be a maximum of $10,000 per day per contravention. Now, they just really started hammering these home, and yeah, but on the spot, an OH&S officer can come write a 10 grand ticket to a company, okay? Usually, again, if you have a great culture, you can stop this from happening. You can go, hey, look, what do you recommend? We're going to help implement this, and they'll give you some time to implement proper policies and procedures. If you say, hey, you can F off and get off my site, well, the ticket book comes out. I got time for this? Yeah. So a good example is my business partner's colleague is OH&S enforcement for Calgary, and he was driving into a McDonald's to get some lunch, and one of the McDonald's employees was taking out the garbage or at where you order, and he was smoking. So the guy politely asked him, hey, can you put that out? And the kid told him to F off. It's none of his business. And then he walked up when he got up to the drive-through where he went to pay, he got out his ticket book, wrote a stop and desist like work order, put it on the window, walked in, cleared everyone out, and closed down that McDonald's. All due to the guy's attitude. And obviously an awesome abuse of power, but I found it very entertaining. right? So they can do these things. If you're in violation of anything, they have the authority to stop work. And then fines and jail time. So I can't give you the whole history lesson on how this came about, but this came about from, it was called Bill C-45, and it was the West Ray Mine incident. So this was kind of the start of all of our fines and penalties. It got approved in 2004, and it was a result of Pictou, Nova Scotia. A mine blew up, killing 27 workers, I believe. And at the time, there was no legislation to actually hold the company accountable for the health and safety violations. And this is where all this has came from now. So if you can be criminally charged under Criminal Code 217 now, and you have to be found negligent of, health and safety, you can do jail time now. The first person to actually get jail time, I think, was 4 years ago now, and it was a superintendent in a swing stage collapse in Toronto, where 3 workers died, and he got 3.5 years. And they proved that they didn't have policies in place, procedures in place. There was a timeline and bonus structure based on everything that to get this job done. So they skipped steps. They showed wanton disregard for the human safety, and it cost 3 people their lives. And now you can do jail time. So, doesn't matter your industry, you are liable and responsible for you, your workers, and anyone who contracts you. Okay, so make sure that you're protected and you have things in place. So what's next? So we built a gap analysis tool for anyone to review their health and safety program. Okay, if you have one, great, use it. If you've implemented everything, that's awesome. Keep up the good work. If you haven't, if you use this tool and you hit no on a bunch of things, well, guess what? You got some work to do, but that's okay. There's resources to help. We have them. But it's a good benchmark when you're looking at companies to see, your company, any company you're working with, and it's simple. Like, sure, there might be 30 questions, but it's way better than the 1,200 point audit I usually do on a company, right? It'll give you a general overview of what's wrong or what you need to work on. And I think that's getting to my time. I've been talking a long time. I hope some of it made sense. I hope I didn't rush too much. And if you guys have any questions, comments, or concerns, I would love to hear them. Stop sharing.
Jackson, fantastic. Team that's joined us today, do we have anything that we want to know right now from an expertise standpoint? Of course, you saw the assessment that is available to send out to anybody that you think could potentially use it as well. And this presentation coming up in the coming weeks will be available digitally as well. And that with this webinar, this will not be the last time that it's going to run as well. So if you found immense value out of it, please look to share it amongst clients, business associates, etc., as this is vital information.
And being that all Cyndicate family, I would love candid feedback and ways to improve.
I got a question for you.
Sure.
You talked a lot about industrial, commercial, construction type situations and that. I have to carry liability insurance,
Yep.
but I'm always at different venues. I sometimes fall under different people's insurance and that because we're using their services and that sort of thing. So how does that how does what you just talked about kind of apply? Like, how would that differentiate in that situation?
So depending on what you're doing, so if you're setting up, let's say if you're setting up a party or a display, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're still interacting with workers. You're still interacting with actually people. So under legislation, you are responsible for the social and psychological well-being of all workers and people who can come in contact with your worksite and their safety. So when it comes to the people who have contracted you, this would fall under them a lot. It would look into their your work contract and see what they have in place for these type of things, or they might just have a little caveat in there that says you are responsible to uphold OH&S, which a lot do, and a lot of people will just sign off and go, yep. But however that kind of hierarchy goes, you are still responsible to assess hazards, protect your workers, protect yourself, and protect the public. So that's I don't know how to.
I know it's kind of a big question. I know there's more sweeping stuff there.
Yeah.
So
a lot of it.
Sorry. I was going to say, so essentially what you're saying is when I'm working with those things, it's probably best to take all of those contracts and bring them to somebody like you and have them reviewed, because it's more than just making sure the electrical cords are taped down so nobody trips.
Yes. Yeah. Well, that's a good start, though. It is 100% of control of a hazard that could affect people. But yes.
Yeah, no, I do that all the time, but there's a lot of people that I've worked with, they seem to think that they're clear. As long as nobody can trip over something, they're clear. So they've got out the, big reams of duct tape, and they're taping everything down to make sure that those are. But I've always been kind of convinced that there's probably a little bit more to our responsibility than that.
There is. So actually, what we build for a lot of jobs that are like one-off kind of things, we call it a site health and safety plan, right? So instead of like a whole policy manual, like we say a policy manual and we can think it's like this huge 900-page thing, and depending on your operations, it could be. Or it could be like 50 pages that, we've templated out to, you can customize for each job you go to, right? So you might have a policy or a procedure saying, hey, this is what we do for cord management. This is what we do for this. This is what we do in case of an emergency. And as long as you have everyone review it and sign off on it, that's a really good step to covering your butt when it comes to due.
Okay, good thing. Yeah, because I've always had the liability insurance, but nobody's ever counseled me, or I think a lot of event planning people, on those things. I don't have anything for somebody to sign off to say that, we've reviewed any kind of safety with them at all. And I've done a lot of events, so I've been very lucky.
The event hazard control for event and emergency response planning for events is huge. Right. And there's a lot of these like niche markets that I'm sure that all of us as a group could really help, but we never look into. Like I use oil and gas and construction as my examples because, well, they're the ones that just kill people all the time. Right. So they're the ones that the government are always looking at as well. Right. They're the ones under the microscope. But that doesn't mean that not every other company is affected by these rules.
Okay, cool. Good to know. Obviously, we need to have more discussion later. So,
always here to help. Any other questions, comments, concerns? Sorry, I'm not better looking while I talk.
On that note, Jackson, thank you very much for coming and sharing about safety. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us here this afternoon. I hope you have found it insightful, or I trust that you have as well. Questions and comments, do not hesitate to reach out to Jackson. Ask him for any information that you need. If you'd like to take and do the assessment yourself for your own business, or know a business that could use it as well, it is very simple. It walks them straight through and will answer any number of pieces of information that are going to be vital for your business moving forward, or for their business as well. And otherwise, watch for the replay of this, and as well for the next one coming up in the next couple of weeks. And on this call today, I do note that we've got Ashley, and she'll be discussing HR next week. So for members of the tribe that are here and joining us, please watch for that, where we'll be talking about human resources and people capital. Have a great afternoon. As always, reach out should you need anything at all. Great to see everybody, and we will talk to you a little later.
Thank you for showing up, everyone. Appreciate it.
Great job, Jackson. Thanks a lot, buddy.
Thanks, Jackson. Very good.
Thank you.